am so angry at Nancy Pelosi right now that you might have to put on your old hat and start critiquing what's going on in Congress right now with their utter lack of humanity in response to this crisis. Shahid, thanks for joining us. You're on mute, just as a heads up.
Thank you. So glad to be with you. And I'm super glad to talk about any of those folks. I mean, holding power accountable is what we are about. And whether that's Biden or Pelosi, unfortunately, there's no shortage of people to be disappointed by in Congress and in Washington.
So what do you think is, I mean, let's put the political strategy hat on before we get to just the disregard for human life. If there was like any out for the Democrats, do you think this is just a game over, well, we want a bigger package once we potentially have the Senate, once Biden takes office? Do you think it's really about that politically? Or, I mean, I'm just giving them a little bit there to maybe that's their out, but.
I mean, yeah, if we imagine a 4-dimensional chess game, at least the center conservative Democrat talking point is we can get more next year if we wait. And the challenge there, of course, is that state and local governments, families, workers, people are struggling right now in a severe, really real way. And to delay the stimulus that our economy needs, that people struggling in an ongoing crisis need for political purposes, I think that's bankrupt at the outset, whether there was a positive rationale for it or not, frankly. And I would just, look at the facts. There's a lot of spin in Washington, and it's hard sometimes to look through different pundits. But if you just look at the facts, what Congress has passed already are tax breaks for millionaires. The centerpiece of this stimulus bill is a corporate liability shield to keep employers from having to answer in courts when they put workers at risk in the middle of a pandemic, or when they put their customers at risk. This isn't a stimulus bill at all. This is a corporate liability shield with a carrot on it, and the carrot is literally half of what McConnell put on the table 2 months ago. And so the idea that anybody should be satisfied with, and I wouldn't use these words, but I will quote Jordan Sheridan from Status Quo, who described it as a shit sandwich, and it is an entirely apt description. No one should be satisfied with it. And it is entirely what we should expect from corporate Democrats. I'm in the uncomfortable position, and it brings me no joy to say, and I don't, but I think a lot, I told you so. And she is just revealing herself, Nancy Pelosi, as the speaker, to be exactly the figure who she has been in Congress for 30 years that no journalist anywhere seems to have been interested in holding her accountable for. I just go back to the fact that she hasn't debated anyone since Ronald Reagan was in the White House, and she governs like Ronald Reagan was still in the White House, and we are all paying the price for it.
Why do you think let's pull back the curtain a little bit on her. I mean, you've obviously spent the last few years, twice, running against her and understanding the psyche. When you're running against a candidate, especially if it's one, you really want to get into the mind of that candidate and their campaign and their operation. And especially in a moment like right now, where she is one of the emblems of why Washington is not responding. I mean, it's one thing to have partisanship and everything's being held up because you have a split government. It's another thing they can come together for military budgets. They can come together for corporate bailouts. They can come together for 9/11 sing-songs on Capitol Hill, if you're old enough to remember that. But they can't come together for an eviction crisis that we're facing in 3 weeks in this country. I've mentioned this stat a few times, and it's probably been updated since then. In New York City alone, in October, 80% of small businesses, that's why I mentioned at the top, could not pay their rent in New York City. So if in New York City that's happening, what's happening in San Francisco? What's happening in Washington, D.C.? What's happening in Chicago, Miami, Dallas, every big city, Phoenix, every big city across America?
Even small towns right now are dealing with this. I mean, this is across the country. And it's not just in terms of the business crisis. Just think about the public health crisis right now. And this is one in which she, too, is complicit. Medicare for all would get people doctors and medicine that they currently can't get. We're the only country in the world that doesn't have it, and we are performing the worst by far without a close second in responding to the coronavirus. As many people are dying every day in the United States as we lost in the 9/11 attacks, every damn day. And that's not just Trump's fault. That is a system-wide failure, and is a system in which corporate Democrats, as you've noted, are unfortunately entirely complicit. And the failures of this paradigm, when I look at Pelosi and I try to explain her governance, just to one riff diving into your question and then a shot and an answer, I saw this similar abdication of partisan interest, what might make sense back when she was covering up CIA torture. Human rights are a democratic position. Barack Obama had just won the White House on an anti-war, anti-Bush platform, and Pelosi's in the background covering up. And not only did she cover up CIA torture then, but she's part of a continuing cover up now. Senator Dianne Feinstein has described this whole saga as a constitutional crisis, and it's why unrepentant torturers lead the CIA today. But I digress. So when Nancy Pelosi was covering up CIA torture, that didn't play in the Democrats' partisan interest. It didn't play in the constitutional interest of regulating the executive branch. It didn't cover the local interest in human rights. San Francisco is a city where the United Nations was founded. And speaking of the United Nations, there just happens to be an international law requiring prosecution where the evidence leads. So in one fell swoop, she undermined international law, the local sensibility supporting human rights, her partisan interest, her constitutional oath of office, and all the, so you might ask, why would she cover up those things? And I would say that Nancy Pelosi ultimately is a power defender. She is an agent of capital, Wall Street, and the military industrial complex. I dare say she is, in fact, an embodiment of each of those things, in to no less an extent than Joe Biden. But again, I digress.
What's really mind-boggling to me about this, though, is yes, on any given day, corporate Democrats are going to defend capital, as of course Republicans are. That's why they're there. I think what's just jaw-dropping is, we talked about this in the show yesterday. You look to the EU and even the most conservative, austerity-driven governments in the EU are giving their citizens
right.
basic income right now. I mean, Angela Merkel, austerity queen, sees humanity in a different light because and the funny thing is they don't even have to do that to get elected. In this country, you do have to do that to get elected. So what I don't understand is Joe Biden is about to inherit this presidency. Doesn't he want the material conditions just to be a little bit better, to deal with just a little bit better, so he doesn't have as much of a shit sandwich to eat on day one?
I would hope so. This is kind of like the question people used to ask the question during the Cold War of, I hope the Russians love their children too. And of course, Joe Biden wants things to be better, I would hope. Except that if you look at who he's been and what he's done over his not recent career, I mean, he's been in Washington for 40 years, and he, just like Nancy Pelosi, is a power defender. He's a cheerleader for every war. He was appointed as Obama's vice president in order to quell fears on Wall Street that Obama was too radical. So Biden is demonstrably the most conservative Democrat to win the White House since Harry Truman 70 years ago. And that's worth noting, right? Everybody's celebrating Trump being gone. And first of all, he's not gone yet. And I think that everybody looking ahead to the Biden administration, I hope certainly we can trust that transition is going to happen with the Supreme Court in the hands of who it is. I am less certain that is necessarily something we can be assured about. But that aside, Biden's been an agent of the past. And I think the whole theme I see when I look at politics at the moment, understanding that it's not as if the climate crisis grew any better in the last several months, right? It's not as if the pandemic, frankly, has gotten any better in the last several months. Like, yes, there's a vaccine, but we have a massive logistical undertaking to do anything about it. And we've demonstrated our capacity to deal with stuff like that recently, right? PPE was a logistical exercise too. And look how well we were prepared for that. I have a lot of skepticism of a great deal of things that the political class seems to be very smugly self-assured about. And the continuity of democracy, the getting on the other side of the pandemic, they're both among them. Climate crisis, obviously. And I see a lot of people looking forward to a normal future when it is not in any way assured. Like, we have a great deal of work to do to try to establish anything even resembling what anybody thinks of as normal in this country. And whatever the past was, I don't think we can return to it. And Biden, of course, having demonstrated himself in office, I think is probably the last person poised to embrace the future. Having said all that, I do have very little hope in Biden, and I have very little trust in Harris, but I do have some hope in Harris. Does that make sense? Like, I don't trust her at all. I saw what she did as the AG. I saw what she did as the DA. She was not a progressive here in California, but she was, frankly, in the Senate, not progressive. Like, she stood generally on the left.
Lose. She signed on to bills that were great for a national political career. I mean, I'm not saying that's.
You're absolutely right.
I am saying.
No, you're totally right. The critical analysis of hers is convenient, and that's true. But the convenience and her inclination to do what's convenient might be a good thing at a time when we, the people, are trying to hold accountable a class of politicians who otherwise have demonstrated their intransigence. She at least is not intransigent. And that I hope offers some possibility for fluidity should she find herself at the desk in the Oval
I mean,
Office.
it's interesting you mentioned that, because the one thing I've noticed in these appointments, which I'd love to get your take on, is there is, I mean, one of the people who's overseeing the appointments right now, the transition committee, is Tony West, who is Kamala Harris's brother-in-law, chief counsel to Uber. So that's why you saw a lot of those, tech companies, Prop 22. I thought we were against Uber, but I guess we're back in Uber is a Democratic, back in the Democratic lane. But you see these appointments, and there are a lot of like Hillary Clinton circle names. And I mean, there've been countless stories written about how Secretary Clinton supported Kamala Harris, sort of gave her the Brock bots, whatever, the online army, which has also been written about, that turned into K-Hive, among
I've
many other
experienced
things.
her online army.
Boy, have I too.
Yeah.
But also the just staffers too. I mean, there's overlap, and of course, there's a little bit of overlap with the Obama world as well. But I am looking at these appointments, and I'm not thinking this is Biden universe. As critical as we are of Biden and how he is a champion for Wall Street, it looks like it's the Kamala Harris cabinet, and I feel like they might want to take a breath before. I don't know. I mean, you're in California. What do you? But with that, actually, what you're saying is she might be more malleable because of the future that she wants to future ambitions. But if potentially she doesn't have to get elected, there's a very real chance of that. That she might inherit the presidency in the next 4 to 8 years. That's just life. But alternatively, if she does have to win, she really does have to shift. And she is not one of these like calcified Washington operatives that come out of the Clintonian DLC era. Like that,
Right.
That era is really pushing, they're running around in circles, their last laps as they're running out of breath. That ideology is dead, but they're very much in power. But she's not of that. And she's not a creature of power, frankly. I mean, it doesn't mean that she didn't come out of power, but she didn't build an infrastructure on her own. She sort of inherited one, I guess is a better way of saying it.
All true things.
What do you think about that? Is that?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. When I look at Kamala Harris, the same case we were describing about her being a weather vane, effectively, puts the onus on us, we the people. If that is the character that she is, it might not suggest exciting things about someone's convictions, but it does suggest opportune things about what we the people can do to hold them accountable, because a weather vane responds in a way that Pelosi and Biden over the course of their careers haven't. And so I do think there's an opportunity there. And I do think that Kamala Harris, to her credit, as someone who has in the Senate demonstrated a willingness to stand to her historical left, that also is encouraging. Her willingness to revisit positions. I really hope that she revisits some of her positions. And just to be clear, her positions in the past have not been good. Right? I mean, she was sending parents to jail for the actions of their kids for poverty crimes. She was not helpful with respect to the death penalty, using her office in ways unhelpful for human rights there. She was not a progressive prosecutor. She was a predatory prosecutor who was claiming a progressive background when it was politically convenient. But as a senator, she, at least stood up to Trump's judicial nominees in ways that many other members of the Senate Judiciary Committee didn't. She's taken other positions that, I agree, to your point, are convenient. She favored the Green New Deal during the presidential debates. And while she, as the vice president-elect, isn't in a position to necessarily stay true to that previous position, if she wins the White House, she might. And that's exactly my point here, is that she, as Kamala Harris, the DA, Kamala Harris, the AG, Kamala Harris, the senator, Kamala Harris, the vice president, and Kamala Harris, the potential future president, are all effectively different people. That's what being a weather vane means. And, that just suggests that we, the people, have opportunities. Now, your point about her inheriting the presidency instead of having to run for it is a really interesting, just to observe that she didn't win a single state primary. And, neither had Biden before this year, before the entire centrist cabal united around him. So I see this entire transition through the lens of yet another election denied the left, in the election machinery being effectively contorted. And I so many people are willing to look past, but it is really it's too soon to stop talking about the divergences between the exit polls and the official results in the Democratic primaries. Those are things that in any other election we would say would render the results suspect. And, so many people have glibly just moved on into this future that we're stepping into. And we can't necessarily relitigate the past, but it does suggest that our elections are anything but reliable. And that's even if you don't think about corporate influence and money and the role of corporate media and whiteouts suppressing challenger candidates or local press punching down unethically. Like, there's so many ways here in which the deck is stacked against change and transition. All that is to say, just coming back to where we started, that Kamala Harris, having inherited a political machine, as someone who at least seems to be still responsive in some way to the electorate in terms of being willing to shift and change over time, that's a very convenient array of circumstances for us to have someone who responds to us having inherited the tools and power and machinery of the generation that's had its knee on the neck of the left and working class families and communities for a generation.
It's interesting you say that. I mean, there's I want to talk about like the attorney general appointment in a second, but Jamie Harrison, who of course ran for Senate against Lindsey Graham this cycle, Jamie Harrison ran for DNC chair in 2017, and I got to know him and interviewed him several times, and several candidates, including Pete Buttigieg in that race. But what was interesting about Jamie Harrison was everybody else that was for lobbyists in the DNC sort of like danced around it. But Jamie Harrison was like, I'm a lobbyist. I think it's great. I think we need to raise as much money as possible. And he said it with a smile and people liked him. And I just thought, even Obama didn't want lobbyists in the DNC, which frankly he gutted. But it's mind-boggling to me because it has become this apparatus to basically just control elections. I mean, I don't think it was always that way. I think that there was I think there are many DNC members who did not support Bernie, who really believe in state parties, who really do believe in cultivating the next generation of talent, whether it's candidates at the local level or operatives at the local level, because that's how you fight Republicans. I mean, they've been doing this strategically and using, when you lose legislatures, we all know gerrymandering can occur afterwards. And you don't, that's how you lose. That's how you lose the battlefield. And I see them just doubling down on this right now with Jamie Harrison. I'm not saying he's a bad guy. He was a former state party chair. He knows how the DNC works, but I'm not expecting to see a shift in strategy. And my fear is at this point, it's not even about winning. It's just about what you're saying, controlling the left that is growing, the left that will only grow as material interests and circumstances get worse for Americans. And simultaneously, so will the right wings, because of their power grid that they have right now, and including media, as you mentioned, they will be tapping into most likely white male working class people and young men who are just frustrated with their circumstances. And so the DNC just sits there as sort of this like lever to push the left away, and no problem walking in the right in. And I don't mean right like corporate right. I mean like crazy right.
The fascist right. Another way to put this, and I think you're absolutely right, is that populism is the inevitable future because the corporate center has delegitimated itself. And it delegitimates itself with increasing clarity with every passing day, from the climate crisis to the pandemic to policing, name your issue, right? It's just so obviously corrupt. And so people are looking for answers outside the institutional landscape. And if populism is going to win, it then becomes a question, will it be left populism, that's right, Bernie and the movement, to try to get universal health care, to try to stop the climate crisis, to try to stand with our communities? Or will it be the terrifying right-wing fascism that we have seen in the world before, that we have mobilized as a civilization to fight a world war to stop and establish an international human rights legacy that, just to bring it full circle, we have abandoned and are among the principal violators of in the world today? To that extent, I would describe that, choice between those two alternative futures as having been made, at least in the past. And the whole point of elections is that we have the chance to choose a different future. And, in Biden winning the White House, that didn't happen for whatever set of reasons. With Harris in the White House, there might be a path to it. We shall see. One lens I want to offer here that just also connects some of the different threads in our conversation is class. You asked me maybe 20 minutes ago, like how to explain Nancy Pelosi's deference to, corporate industry, even when it undermines the interests of the party and her constituents. And the answer is class. She is a wealthy person, a centimillionaire. Everyone in Congress, with a handful of exceptions, fits that description. They are all very comfortable people who are not, and her in particular, just like the president, they're not subject to the pressures that confront the rest of us. None of them are worried about getting evicted. None of them are standing in a bread line that stretches around the block from the food pantry and down the highway. We've all seen videos and photos like that's what we are dealing with, right? She's showing off a freezer full of gourmet ice cream that it's preposterous to me that people don't think of two-party rule as basically a legitimating veneer for plutocracy. We are talking about rule of a few, rule by the wealthy and by capital. People, this is a point worth pressing on. There's a lot of discussion as socialism gains greater footing about capitalism and what it is. And people are like, capitalism is markets. Capitalism is the chance to, invest in things. Capitalism is money. Capitalism is when people are subject to the needs of resources instead of the other way around, right? Ideally, resources would be subject to the needs of people. That would make sense. But when people have become instrumentalities, when we are reduced to commodities, when we are sacrificed on the meatpacking factory floor, or in the farms where the farm workers are getting, COVID at astronomical rates and bringing it home to their families, when we sacrifice workers on the halls of the hospitals where they go to work and don't have adequate PPE to protect them, that is a declaration that capital matters more to our civilization than human beings. And that is not okay, period. And that's where I see Pelosi and Biden standing with the past. And that's why I was really excited to support Bernie Sanders. It's why I'm so excited about the squad. It's why I'm so excited about many of the voices emerging around our country that are committed to inverting that calculus, to making insulin and other medications free, to making sure that we're distributing resources to serve human needs instead of squeezing human beings to increase accumulations of capital.
That's exactly it. We use humans as a commodity, not only a resource, as you said, but as a commodity. Let's talk about some of the appointments. Who stands out to you right now as we've all talked about Neera Tanden and Rahm Emanuel. I feel like those are just, I don't want to say distractions. Neera is very likely, she may not get confirmed, but I do think that they're put out there to kind of suck up all of the left's energy so that we don't really look into some equally dangerous people for very different reasons. We just may not be household names. So who are some names, some of these appointments that are standing out to you right now?
The agriculture department's an interesting one. So Tom Vilsack, former Iowa governor, has been named as Obama's person in that slot. And the idea that 12 years later, we're just going to recycle the same people because that stuff all worked out really well. I mean, it's just so weak. It's so weak. Now, the one thing that's interesting here is the person I had favored for that slot is Marcia Fudge, who I'm grateful is getting appointed somewhere, though there's a really interesting analysis to share here. So Marcia Fudge is a representative from Ohio. She's been named as the HUD, Housing and Urban Development Director. And that's great. I'm glad that she has a spot in the administration, particularly because it opens up a seat in Congress. Generally, the movement's concern is don't poach members of Congress for spots in the administration because it's an uncertain political environment. We want to hold those seats. That's a very blue seat. And one person who might run for it, someone I'm very excited about, I would love to see Nina Turner in Congress. And if Marcia Fudge going into the administration creates that possibility, I'm just excited for that, period, full stop. Let's, make that happen. And HUD is the appointment basically that Black cabinet secretaries get appointed to. She's been pigeonholed in a traditional role where, right? And the point here is that she has expertise with respect, particularly to her committee work in Congress on issues that relate to the Department of Agriculture and nutrition. And she could be the kind of visionary appointee who has an agenda, who has support from figures, including Jim Clyburn, to whom Joe Biden owes his office. Let's just be clear. So when asked by the person who delivered him the White House, which Jim Clyburn did, and we could tell that story if we needed to, but I'll just presume it for now. Jim Clyburn, the person who Biden owes the office to, the dean of the Congressional Black Caucus, he goes to the mat for this appointment, and Joe Biden gives us Tom Vilsack, the governor.
Tom Vilsack hates cuts deals with Monsanto. I mean, it's.
Right.
Marcia Fudge, when I was in the Unity Reform Commission, I mean, it's actually amazing. I'm going to start paying attention to every member of the Unity Reform Commission and seeing where they ended up. But Marcia Fudge was on the Unity Reform Commission with me. And the commission was 21 members, and we met, basically over 2 years around the country. And
did you have a chance to interact with her directly?
Yes, very much so. Very much so. We obviously we interacted with 21 members, so we interacted with everybody. Sure. I mean, it was fascinating to me because she was somebody who was for with the reforms that we were putting forward in terms of budget oversight. We worked very closely with her on that.
Great.
I can't say it wasn't I don't know. I mean, there was a lot of game playing happening on that commission, but she worked with us in drafting the language, and at least publicly facing, which is important if you're a Congress member, she was for the Unity Reform Commission, like the reforms in terms of budget oversight and getting lobbyists out and transparency. And I thought that was commendable. Nice. And my interactions with her were actually quite lovely. And she knew how to really like work people kind of, as a Congresswoman, you have to do that. Mm-hmm. So I think it'd be interesting. I didn't know about her agricultural experience until I started reading about it this week, but I think you're right. I mean, it just shows that whoever made that decision and got into Biden's ear about where Marcia Fudge should go. I mean, it shows his blind spots. It shows how he sees race and class and housing, frankly, right now. But, I do really hope that I think she has a deeper sense of what's needed in the moment. I do think she recognizes crises. I think she understands what's written. So I'm hoping that through that position, unlike, say, Andrew Cuomo, who ran HUD in the 90s, right, we see somebody who can really transform the HUD department, because we have a housing crisis in this country, and you look at cities across the country that do receive federal funding when it comes to public housing, and public housing is in disarray. Public housing is not free for people to live there. They have to pay rent. Oftentimes it's not cheap. It's way higher than many small cities across America if you look at the big cities. And there's a huge crisis, whether it's lead paint crisis or water, or just being in total decay, not having heat, equipment upgrades. We've seen the stories and we read them. So I'm hoping she understands that, and she'll present the needs of the most vulnerable people from that position. So
likewise.
Final thoughts, Shahid.
Well, you're pressing on a really important aspect of the role that a lot of people overlook. Like, the cabinet level positions are effectively advocates for the departments that they oversee. And so you're absolutely right that there is a dire housing crisis. There was a housing crisis even before the pandemic made it worse. Right. And I fear that by the time the Biden administration takes office, presuming for the moment that, the obstacles in the meantime remove themselves, it will get worse. Trump. Basically. Well, and particularly the courts. I don't trust the courts any further than one can throw them. We literally have torturers with lifetime seats to the Supreme Court. Most people don't realize Brett Kavanaugh was a Bush era torture lawyer. This is why accountability matters, and why when people talk about giving the Trump administration criminals a free pass, I remember when we did that for the Bush era criminals, because Obama wanted to look forward, not back. And as a result, we now get Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court and Gina Haspel leading the CIA, instead of both of them being in prison where they belong. And
that's why we need to take on these fights. So when they mock AOC for saying we should try the Trump administration or never let them work again, there is a reason. These people don't go away. They are swamp creatures. They are cockroaches. They literally will come back, and worse, they eat you alive. They're vultures.
They prey on the public. They are predators, like constitutional predators, you might say. And one of them is on the Supreme Court, right? And he's not even the furthest right. Barrett is further to the right. And we've seen the propensity, not just of the Supreme Court, but the GOP Senate as well, to put naked partisan interest in front of fidelity to the country and the people. And so given that state of affairs, I'm very hesitant to be, falsely assured of a transition happening. But just, again, to presume that it happens, I think that Fudge in the cabinet is great, because she will be a stronger advocate for housing interventions and support than I think any of her predecessors were. And, especially with members of Congress, maybe hopefully including Nina Turner, clamoring for social housing. And there have been some really insightful proposals. I had the honor of being at the press conference on the Senate side when Bernie and AOC introduced the Green New Deal for public housing. And it's a transformative vision that would introduce, I think the first wave was $80 billion to retrofit established public housing to make sure it's as environmentally and friendly, and particularly as energy efficient as could possibly be. And the vision also includes returning accountability for public housing developments to the communities. And this era of social housing that we could step into, where instead of governments supporting private development to make affordable units, instead we have publicly owned facilities that can be accountable to the residents and the communities. That's the sweet spot, and we can get there. And that's something that Marcia Fudge might be instrumental in making happen. And I just go back to where we started, which is that if any opening to get someone like Nina Turner into Congress is one we should all be very excited about, because she can do a lot with a platform like that, to ask questions in oversight hearings, to introduce novel proposals, to call bullshit on the corporate Democrats, and to help, frankly, marshal a movement of people around the country who recognize this lack of legitimacy that is spreading across the center, and people who are looking for alternative voices, who recognize that we need them. Like, the squad is great and we need to expand it. And I think Nina would be, an incredible general to marshal the squad.
We live in interesting times. Very exciting. There's a lot happening. I never thought I'd be cheering on Jon Ossoff and even Marcia Fudge, to be honest. But it's kind of a crazy moment.
Politics makes for crazy things, certainly.
It does, yeah. Thanks for watching and listening to The Nomiki Show. But remember to click like and subscribe on YouTube, and please share on social media. If you're not already a patron, please join us for as low as $5 a month on patreon.com/The Nomiki Show for early and special content. That investment makes a huge difference. We are not corporate media raking in the dough. It's really you guys that are keeping us going. So please consider being a patron. And to our current patrons, thank you so much. We are incredibly grateful to you. We also now have swag. So check us out on thenomikishow.com to get your mugs, your totes, and your stickers.